Have you ever noticed how some women don't need to try to be seen? They don't speak the loudest. They don't chase attention. They don't force their presence. And yet, when they enter a room, something shifts. It's subtle. Almost invisible. But you feel it. People listen more closely. They respond more warmly. They notice, without knowing why. And maybe you've asked yourself, what is it about them? Because it's not always beauty. It's not always status. And it's definitely not effort. It's something deeper. Something unspoken. Something that can't be faked for long. And here's the part that stings a little. Because if you're honest, there are moments when you don't feel that way. Moments when you second-guess yourself. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you said the wrong thing. You become aware of how you're standing, how you're speaking, how you're being perceived. And suddenly, you don't feel natural anymore. You feel watched, judged, measured. And in those moments, something changes. You hold back. You shrink just a little. You hesitate before expressing yourself fully. Not because you don't have something to say, but because something inside you whispers. What if it's not enough? What if you're not enough? And that whisper, it doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly sits in the background, guiding your behavior without you even realizing it. It shows up when you're about to speak. When you're about to take a step forward. When you're about to be seen. And instead of moving freely, you pause. You adjust. You filter yourself. You become careful. And over time, that carefulness becomes a habit. You start choosing the safer option. The quieter response. The version of yourself that feels acceptable, but not fully expressed. And here's the strange part. From the outside, everything might look fine. People might think you're doing well. They might even compliment you. But inside, there's a gap. A gap between who you are and how you show up. A gap between your potential and your expression. And that gap creates a quiet tension. Because deep down, you know there's more to you. More confidence. More presence. More certainty. But it doesn't always come out when you want it to. It comes and goes. Sometimes you feel strong. Grounded. Clear. And then, something small happens. A comment. A look. A moment of comparison. And suddenly, it fades. That confidence you felt just hours ago. It disappears. And you're left wondering. Why can't I stay like that? Why does it feel real one moment, and gone the next? And maybe you've tried to fix it. You've tried to be more confident. You've told yourself to stop overthinking. To stop caring what people think. You've pushed yourself to speak up more. To act stronger. To appear more certain. But it feels forced. Like you're playing a role. And no matter how well you play it, there's always that underlying feeling that it's not fully you. So eventually, you get tired. Tired of trying. Tired of adjusting. Tired of feeling like confidence is something you have to constantly chase. And that's when the deeper question begins to form. What if confidence isn't something you create? What if it's not something you earn? Or build? Or prove? What if it's something else entirely? Because those women, the ones who don't chase attention, who don't force their presence, who don't question themselves every second, they're not doing more. They're not trying harder. If anything, they're doing less. Less overthinking. Less doubting. Less adjusting. So what do they have that feels so different? What do they understand that most people don't? Because it can't just be luck. It can't just be personality. And it definitely can't be something you either have or don't. There's a pattern. A quiet, invisible pattern. And once you start to notice it, you realize something powerful. Those women are not reacting to the world the same way most people do. They're not waiting for validation to feel valuable. They're not waiting for approval to feel worthy. They're not waiting for proof to feel confident. Somehow, they've already decided. And because they've already decided, they move differently, speak differently, carry themselves differently. Not dramatically, not loudly, but consistently. And that consistency, it changes everything. Because when you no longer question your own value, you stop looking for confirmation everywhere else. And when that happens, something shifts. Not just inside you, but around you. So the real question is not, how do I become more confident? The real question is, what is it that they've already accepted about themselves that you're still questioning? Let's slow this down for a moment. Because before anything changes, you need to understand something clearly. There is nothing wrong with you. Not with the way you think. Not with the way you feel. Not with the moments you doubt yourself. You are not broken. You are not less confident by nature. And you are definitely not incapable of becoming the woman you know you can be. What you're experiencing is learned. Quietly learned. Over time. Without you even realizing it. Because confidence, or the lack of it, doesn't appear randomly. It's shaped by moments, by experiences, by subtle messages you absorbed growing up. Think about it. There were times when you felt judged. Times when you compared yourself to someone else. Times when you felt like you had to prove something, just to be accepted. Maybe no one said it directly. But you felt it. That pressure to be better. To be enough. To be liked. And slowly, without noticing, you began to measure yourself through other people's eyes. You started asking questions like, how do I look? What do they think of me? Am I doing this right? And those questions, they seem normal. Almost harmless. But over time, they create a habit. A habit of looking outward instead of inward. And that's where the disconnect begins. Because the more you rely on external feedback, the less you trust your own internal sense of self. So even when you do something right, you still question it. Even when someone appreciates you, you still doubt it. Even when you succeed, it doesn't fully land. Because deep down, you've been trained to believe that your worth is something that needs to be confirmed. Again and again. And that creates a subtle dependency. A quiet need for reassurance. Not because you're weak, but because that's what you were taught. And here's the important part. This wasn't your decision. You didn't wake up one day and choose to doubt yourself. You adapted. You responded. You learned how to navigate the world in a way that felt safe. And at the time, it probably helped you. It helped you fit in. It helped you avoid rejection. It helped you stay accepted. But now, that same pattern is holding you back. Because what once protected you is now limiting you. And that can feel confusing. Because part of you knows you're capable of more. But another part of you still hesitates. Still questions. Still pulls back. And that creates an internal conflict. A quiet tug-of-war between who you are and who you've been conditioned to believe you are. So when you feel stuck, it's not because you lack confidence. It's because your mind is trying to stay consistent with an identity that was built in the past. An identity that may no longer reflect who you truly are. But it still feels familiar. And familiarity feels safe. Even when it's limiting. Even when it's frustrating. Even when it keeps you from expressing your full self. That's why change can feel uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. And your mind, it prefers the familiar. So it pulls you back. Not to hurt you, but to protect you. To keep you within what it recognizes as you. And when you understand this, something shifts. Because instead of blaming yourself, you begin to see the pattern. Instead of thinking, why am I like this? You start asking, what did I learn that made me this way? And that question is powerful. Because it removes the weight. It removes the judgment. It creates space for understanding. And from that space, real change becomes possible. Because now you're not trying to fix yourself. You're simply becoming aware of what was never truly you to begin with. And awareness is where everything starts to shift. So if you've been hard on yourself, if you've been frustrated with your confidence, if you felt like you should be further ahead by now, pause for a moment. And consider this. What if you're not behind? What if you're simply waking up to something you were never taught? Because confidence isn't something you were meant to chase. It's something that was always there. Before the doubt. Before the comparison. Before the conditioning. And now, you're just beginning to see it again. Now here's where things start to shift. Because once you understand that your confidence wasn't lost, but conditioned, you naturally begin to ask, okay, so how do I fix it? And this is where most women unknowingly go in the wrong direction. Not because they're doing something stupid, but because they're following what seems logical. They try to improve confidence by changing things on the outside. They focus on looking better, speaking better, acting more, achieving more. And for a while, it works. You feel a boost. A temporary sense of control. You dress well, you feel good. You receive a compliment, you feel confident. You succeed, you feel capable. But then, it fades. And you're back to questioning yourself again. Why? Because what you're building is not confidence. It's dependence. Dependence on conditions being right. And the moment those conditions change, your confidence shifts with them. That's why one bad day can undo so much. One comment. One rejection. One comparison. And suddenly, everything feels uncertain again. So you try harder. You push yourself more. You tell yourself, I just need to be stronger. I need more discipline. I need to stop caring what people think. But that approach creates another problem. Because now, you're not just dealing with self-doubt. You're also fighting yourself. You're trying to silence something that hasn't been understood yet. And anything you fight internally tends to grow stronger. So instead of resolving the issue, you create tension. And that tension feels like overthinking, self-consciousness, emotional exhaustion. You're constantly monitoring yourself. How am I coming across? Did I say that right? Do they like me? It becomes a loop. A mental loop that never fully shuts off. And here's the part most people don't realize. This has nothing to do with your ability. Nothing to do with your potential. and everything to do with your self-image. Because no matter what you do externally, your internal identity stays in control. You can act confident. But if you don't see yourself as confident, it will always feel like an act. You can achieve success. But if you don't see yourself as worthy, it will always feel temporary. You can receive love. But if you don't see yourself as lovable, you will question it. This is why so many women feel like they're faking it. Because on the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, it doesn't match. And that mismatch creates discomfort. So eventually, you return to what feels familiar. Even if it's limiting. Even if it's frustrating. Because the mind always chooses identity over effort. Always. And this is the core mistake. Most women try to change their life without changing how they see themselves. They try to upgrade results without upgrading identity. And that never lasts. Because identity is the root. Everything else is just a reflection. So if the root doesn't change, the pattern repeats. In different situations. With different people. At different stages of life. But the feeling stays the same. That quiet doubt. That hesitation. That sense of not fully being there yet. And this is where frustration builds. Because you're doing the work. You're trying. You're improving. And still, something feels off. And that something is not visible. It's internal. It's the way you see yourself. When no one is watching. The assumptions you carry silently. The identity you've accepted over time. And until that shifts, everything else will feel like effort. And effort cannot sustain confidence. Because real confidence doesn't require constant effort. It feels natural. It feels stable. It feels like you. So the problem is not that you're doing too little. It's that you're focusing on the wrong level. You've been trying to change behavior. When the real change needs to happen. At the level of identity. And once you see that, everything starts to make sense. Why things haven't lasted. Why confidence feels inconsistent. Why you keep returning to old patterns. Not because you're failing. But because you've been solving the wrong problem. And that realization is where everything begins to change. Now that you can clearly see where the disconnect comes from, we can go deeper. Because this isn't random. There is a principle behind everything you've experienced so far. A quiet law that operates whether you're aware of it or not. And once you understand it, everything begins to make sense in a completely different way. This is what thinkers like Joseph Murphy tried to explain in the simplest terms. Your life does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you accept as true about yourself. Read that again, slowly. Because this is where most people get confused. They believe that desire is enough. If I want to be confident, I will become confident. If I want a better life, I will create one. But wanting is not the same as believing. And your subconscious mind does not operate on wishes. It operates on identity. On what feels real to you. On what you have repeated so many times internally. That it no longer feels like a thought. It feels like a fact. And that fact becomes your self-image. Now here's how the law works. Your subconscious mind is always trying to maintain consistency. Whatever identity you hold. It will guide your behavior, your reactions, your decisions. To match that identity. Not consciously. Automatically. Effortlessly. If you see yourself as someone who is confident, you don't need to force confidence. You naturally speak more freely. Make eye contact. Express your thoughts without over-filtering. Not because you're trying, but because that's who you believe you are. But if, deep down, your identity says, I'm not enough. I'm not that confident. I need to be careful. Then no matter what you do externally, your mind will pull you back. It will create hesitation. It will trigger overthinking. It will make you second-guess yourself. Not to sabotage you, but to protect your current identity. Because to the subconscious mind, consistency feels safe. Even if that consistency limits you. Even if it keeps you small. Even if it holds you back from becoming who you truly are. And this is why change feels difficult. Not because you lack ability, but because you're trying to step into a new version of yourself, without updating the internal agreement you've made about who you are. And that internal agreement is powerful. It shapes how you interpret everything. Let's say someone compliments you. If your self-image is strong, you accept it easily. It feels natural. It aligns with how you already see yourself. But if your self-image is weak, you question it. They're just being nice. They don't really mean it. If they knew the real me, they wouldn't say that. Same compliment. Different identity. Different experience. This is how deeply this law operates. It filters reality. It doesn't just affect what you do. It affects what you allow. What you accept. What you believe is possible for you. And most importantly, what you feel comfortable receiving. Because here's something most people never realize. You don't receive what you desire. You receive what you feel worthy of. And worthiness is not something you prove. It's something you assume. Quietly. Internally. Consistently. So if your internal identity is limited, you will unconsciously downplay yourself. Avoid opportunities. Stay silent when you should speak. Settle for less than you deserve. Not because you want to, but because your mind is aligning your life with what it believes is true about you. And this is the hidden law behind confidence. Confidence is not created through effort. It is the natural result of a self-image that no longer questions its own value. A self-image that has been accepted so deeply that it no longer needs constant reassurance. And this is why some women appear naturally confident. Not because they are perfect. Not because they never doubt. But because their baseline identity is different. Their internal agreement is different. They don't wake up every day asking, am I enough? They've already answered that question. And once that question is answered internally, life begins to reflect it externally. Not instantly, but consistently. Because your behavior changes. Your energy changes. Your decisions change. And over time, your results follow. So this is not about becoming someone new. It's about understanding the law that's already shaping your life. And realizing that if your identity created your current reality, it can also create a different one. Once you become aware of it. Now everything comes together. All the overthinking. All the inconsistency. All those moments where confidence felt real, and then disappeared. They all point to one thing. Not your effort. Not your ability. Not your circumstances. But your self-image. And this is the moment where the truth becomes simple. Clear. Undeniable. You don't become confident by trying harder. You become confident the moment you stop questioning who you are. This is the secret every confident woman understands. She is not constantly building confidence. She is living from a decision that has already been made. A quiet, internal decision. I am enough. I am worthy. I belong. And once that decision is made, everything changes. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But fundamentally. Because she is no longer looking at herself through a lens of doubt. She is no longer asking, am I doing this right? Do they like me? What if I'm not good enough? Those questions lose their power. Not because she forced them away, but because they no longer align with how she sees herself. And this is the shift most people miss. They think confidence comes from eliminating doubt. But that's not how it works. Confidence comes from choosing an identity. That makes doubt irrelevant. Because if you truly see yourself as enough, then even if a moment of doubt appears, it doesn't define you. It passes. It doesn't control your behavior. It doesn't shrink your presence. Because your identity is no longer built on uncertainty. It's built on decision. And decision is powerful. Because the moment you decide who you are, your mind begins to organize everything around that. Your thoughts begin to shift. Your reactions begin to shift. Your standards begin to shift. Not because you're forcing change, but because you're aligning with a new version of yourself. This is why confident women don't chase validation. Because they've already validated themselves. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't need approval to feel secure. Because their sense of self is not dependent on external responses. It comes from within. And that creates a different kind of presence. A calm presence. A grounded energy. A quiet certainty that doesn't need to prove anything. And people feel that. They may not be able to explain it. But they respond to it. Because certainty is attractive. Not loud certainty. Not arrogant certainty. But calm, unshaken certainty. The kind that says, I know who I am. And I don't need to convince you. And this is where everything shifts for you. Because now the focus changes. You're no longer trying to act confident. You're no longer trying to fix every thought. You're no longer trying to control how others see you. Instead, you begin to ask a different question. What have I accepted about myself that needs to change? Because that acceptance is the root of everything. If you've accepted that you're not confident, you will keep proving it. If you've accepted that you're not enough, you will keep feeling it. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. And your mind protects what feels familiar. So the real shift is this. You stop waiting for proof. And you start choosing identity. You stop asking for permission. And you start defining who you are. Not based on the past. Not based on mistakes. Not based on other people's opinions. But based on what you decide is true, moving forward. And at first, this might feel uncomfortable. Unnatural. Even a little fake. Because you're stepping outside of what feels familiar. But that's exactly how transformation begins. Not by staying comfortable, but by choosing something higher. Before it feels natural. And then repeating it. Gently. Consistently. Until it becomes your new normal. Because identity is not changed in one moment. It's reinforced over time. Through repetition. Through awareness. Through choosing, again and again. This is who I am now. And eventually, that choice becomes automatic. That identity becomes stable. And confidence is no longer something you think about. It becomes something you are. Effortlessly. Quietly. Naturally. So the secret is not hidden. It's simple. But it requires honesty. It requires awareness. And most importantly, it requires a decision. A decision to stop living from an identity that limits you and start living from one that supports you. Because once that decision is made, everything else begins to follow. At this point, you understand the idea. You see how identity shapes confidence. You see how self-image controls behavior. But the real question is, does this actually work in real life? Not just in theory. Not just in thought. But in everyday situations. With real people. With real struggles. And the answer is yes. Not in a dramatic, unrealistic way. But in a quiet, undeniable shift that changes everything over time. Let's look at what that actually looks like. There was a woman who always felt uncomfortable in social settings. Not because she didn't know how to speak. Not because she lacked intelligence. But because she constantly felt like she didn't belong. Every time she entered a room, her mind would start racing. What should I say? Do I look okay? What if they don't like me? So instead of being present, she became self-aware. Overly aware. She would speak less. Smile more than necessary. Agree, even when she didn't fully mean it. And afterward, she would replay everything in her mind. Every word. Every reaction. It was exhausting. So she tried to fix it. She watched videos on confidence. She practiced body language. She pushed herself to act confident. And for a moment, it worked. But deep down, nothing changed. Because her identity was still the same. I'm not someone who naturally fits in. Then something shifted. Instead of trying to fix her behavior, she asked a different question. What if I already belonged? Not as a technique. Not as a performance. But as a decision. At first, it felt strange. Almost uncomfortable. Her mind resisted it. But she didn't fight the resistance. She simply returned to that thought. I belong here. Again and again. In small moments. When she walked into a room. When she spoke. When she felt doubt rising. She didn't try to act differently. She just held that identity. And slowly, something changed. Her body relaxed. Her tone softened. Her words became more natural. Not forced. Not rehearsed. Just real. And what's interesting is, people responded differently. They included her more. They listened more closely. They engaged more openly. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because she did. Another woman struggled in relationships. She constantly felt like she had to earn love. She would give more. Care more. Adjust more. And still, she often felt uncertain. Like she wasn't fully chosen. Deep down, her identity was, I have to prove I'm worth loving. And that belief shaped everything. She tolerated inconsistency. She overanalyzed messages. She stayed in situations that didn't feel right. Not because she didn't see it. But because she didn't feel like she deserved more. Then one day, she stopped trying to fix her relationships. And instead, she focused on one thing. What would change if I already believed I was worthy of real, stable love? That question changed her direction. Because instead of chasing, she started choosing. She became more honest. More clear. More grounded in what she would accept. And slowly, the patterns began to break. Not because she forced anything, but because her identity no longer matched the old dynamics. And when identity shifts, you stop aligning with what once felt normal. And then there was a woman in her career. She had ideas. She had insight. She had potential. But she rarely spoke up. In meetings, she would stay quiet. even when she knew she had something valuable to say. Why? Because her internal belief was, my voice isn't that important. So even when opportunities appeared, she hesitated. She waited. She held back. And afterward, she would regret it. Again and again. Until she made one simple shift. Not in strategy. Not in skill. But in identity. She began to tell herself, my voice matters. Not loudly. Not forcefully. Just consistently. Every day. In small moments. And when the next opportunity came, she still felt nervous. But something was different. She didn't wait. She spoke. Not perfectly. Not flawlessly. But honestly. And that moment changed something. Not because it was big, but because it was aligned. And from that point forward, it became easier. More natural. More consistent. These stories are not about perfection. They're not about instant transformation. They're about alignment. About what happens when your internal identity finally matches the version of yourself you've been trying to become. Because once that happens, you stop forcing change. And you start allowing it. You stop chasing confidence. And you start living from it. Quietly. Naturally. In a way that doesn't feel like effort anymore. And that's the proof. Not loud. Not exaggerated. But real. And repeatable. Now that you understand the principle and have seen how it works in real life, the next step is practical application. This is where theory turns into action, and where you begin to take control over the version of yourself that shows up in every situation. Start by observing your current self-image. Not superficially, but deeply. Notice what you tell yourself when no one is watching. What do you believe about your value? About your confidence? About your ability to be seen, to be heard, to be appreciated? These are the internal scripts that have guided you up to this point, quietly shaping your decisions, your reactions, and your presence. Awareness is the first step because you cannot change what you do not notice. Once you've observed, begin to interrupt the old identity. When doubt, hesitation, or insecurity arises, do not fight it. Do not push it away or berate yourself for feeling it. Instead, simply pause and ask, is this who I choose to be? This question shifts the focus from resistance to awareness. It is not judgment. It is choice. And choice is powerful because it begins to separate you from the old patterns that have kept you small. The next step is defining your new identity. Keep it simple. Keep it clear. Choose phrases that feel solid and uncompromising. I am confident, I am worthy, I trust myself, I belong. Repeat them quietly in your mind, in moments of hesitation, in the mirror, in everyday life. Let them replace the old phrases that once guided you unconsciously. This is not about affirmations that feel empty. This is about creating a new internal standard and identity that your mind can organize reality around. Once defined, think from that identity. In moments of fear or uncertainty, do not attempt to manufacture courage externally. Instead, align internally first. Speak from certainty rather than trying to appear confident. Move from the understanding that your value is inherent, that your voice is meaningful, and that your presence is naturally noticed. In small, everyday actions, raising your hand in a meeting, sharing your opinion in a conversation, expressing your needs in a relationship, you begin to live this identity. At first, it may feel unnatural. That is normal. Growth rarely feels comfortable at the start. Consistency is key. Identity shifts do not happen in a single moment. They are reinforced over time, in repeated choices. Every time you act from your new identity, your mind accepts it as true. Every time you honor yourself, every time you step into situations aligned with this identity, the subconscious mind absorbs it and begins to adjust. Slowly, the old patterns lose their grip. Slowly, confidence becomes less about effort and more about being. Pay attention to your responses in everyday situations. When a situation arises that would have once triggered self-doubt, notice your new reaction. Perhaps you pause for a moment and then proceed with calm certainty. Perhaps you speak without overanalyzing. Perhaps you set a boundary you would have previously avoided. Each act is a reinforcement of the new identity. Over time, these small moments accumulate into a fundamental shift, reshaping how the world perceives you and how you perceive yourself. Remember, this process is not about perfection. You will have moments where doubt reappears. Moments when old patterns feel familiar and comfortable. That is normal. The difference now is that you observe them without judgment, without panic, and redirect your focus back to the chosen identity. The more consistently you return, the faster the subconscious mind begins to accept it as truth, until it no longer feels like a choice, it simply is. Integration also requires patience and gentleness. You are not dismantling years of conditioning in a day. You are gradually shifting a deeply ingrained self-perception. Honor small victories. Celebrate moments when you act from certainty instead of hesitation. Notice how interactions change, how opportunities begin to open, how relationships and connections respond differently. These are the signs that the identity shift is taking root. They are proof that this approach works, silently but powerfully. Finally, make it habitual. Identity is maintained by repeated practice, reinforced by conscious alignment. Begin and end each day with awareness of who you are choosing to be. In moments of challenge, return to your statements of identity. Let them guide your words, your actions, your presence. Over time, confidence becomes effortless, natural, and visible not because of how you perform, but because of who you have become internally. The world responds automatically to the energy of a woman who no longer doubts her worth. This is the ultimate activation, living from the identity of a confident, self-assured, inherently worthy woman. Not in theory, not in aspiration, but in your daily choices, in your behavior, in your energy. When you consistently apply these steps, the external world shifts in response. People listen more. Opportunities flow naturally. Relationships deepen. And most importantly, you feel anchored in yourself. You stop chasing validation, approval, or recognition. You embody it because you already know it internally. You are no longer attempting to become confident. You are remembering what was always within you, the inherent worth, the natural authority, the quiet certainty. And from this place, every interaction, every decision, every moment is guided by a profound internal alignment. Confidence is no longer a task. It is your nature.